Queen Vizara sat in her grand palace, watching the stars through the large windows. Her mind was busy with royal matters, the future of her people, and the daily challenges of ruling an entire kingdom. She had been through many battles, faced many difficult decisions, but today was different. Today her daughter, Princess Lyra, had returned from her mission on Earth, and something about her seemed off. Lyra had always been a strong and independent princess. She had traveled to Earth to help with a peace agreement, meeting humans and learning about their culture. It was supposed to be a simple mission, a few months away from home. But when Lyra entered the palace hall, Queen Vizara saw something that made her heart skip a beat. Her daughter looked different. Her body seemed softer, her eyes held a strange look, and her movements were slower. "Lyra, my child," Queen Vizara said, walking toward her. "What has happened to you?" Lyra smiled weakly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mother, I have something to tell you." Queen Vizara's eyes narrowed with concern. "You are different. Tell me, what's wrong?" Lyra hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. She took a deep breath before speaking. I am pregnant, Mother." The words hit the queen like a thunderstorm. Pregnant. Queen Vizara's mind raced. She stared at her daughter, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. This was impossible. Princess Lyra had always been careful. She had never shown any interest in love or family matters. But now, she was pregnant. The queen's heart began to pound in her chest. "Pregnant," Queen Vizara repeated, her voice shaking with disbelief. "How is this possible?" Lyra looked down, her face red with shame. "I met a human. He saved my life on Earth. His name is Ethan. Over time, we became close, and now I am carrying his child." Queen Vizara stepped back, her hands clenched into fists. A human had gotten her daughter pregnant. The queen couldn't understand. Her mind raced with questions. How could this happen? What would this mean for their people? For their kingdom? You are carrying a human's child," Queen Vizara said slowly, her voice full of disbelief. "How could you? We are aliens, Lyra. We are not meant to mix with humans." Lyra looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "Mother, I didn't plan this. I didn't expect it. But Ethan is kind, and he cares for me. He treated me with respect. He didn't see me as just an alien princess. He saw me as a person, and I fell in love with him." Queen Vizara's mind was a storm of emotions: anger, confusion, fear, and even a little sadness. She had never expected her daughter to fall for a human. She had always imagined Lyra marrying someone from their own species, someone who would strengthen their bloodline. But now, her daughter was carrying a child who was half human. "Do you understand what this means?" Queen Vizara asked, her voice suddenly cold. "A human child. This could destroy everything. The bloodline, the throne, our people. We cannot allow this." Lyra's face fell. "I know, Mother. I know it's not what you expected. But Ethan is a good man. He didn't force me into anything. He cares for me, and he wants to raise this child with me." Queen Vizara paced back and forth, trying to gather her thoughts. She had always believed that her kingdom needed to stay pure, that their alien blood was the key to their strength. But now, this human had entered their world, and there was nothing she could do to erase it. Lyra stood silently, her head bowed in shame. She knew her mother was angry, but she had hoped for understanding. She had hoped that her mother would see Ethan the way she did, a man who was brave and caring, someone who had protected her when she needed it most. "I need to meet him," Queen Vizara said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. "I need to see this human with my own eyes. I need to know if he is truly worthy of being part of our world." Lyra looked up, surprised. "You want to meet him?" "Yes," the queen said, her voice firm. "We cannot allow this to continue unless I am certain he has good intentions. I will not let our people suffer because of a human. But if he truly cares for you, then I will consider it." Lyra's heart raced. She had hoped for her mother's approval, but now she wasn't sure what to expect. The queen had always been strong and proud, and Lyra knew this was going to be difficult. But if her mother could just see how much Ethan meant to her, maybe she would understand. "Thank you, Mother," Lyra whispered. "I will bring him to you." As the queen watched her daughter leave to fetch the human, a deep feeling of uncertainty settled in her chest. This was only the beginning. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: her life, and her kingdom's future, would never be the same again. The truth. The grand hall was quiet as Queen Vezara sat on her throne, her eyes fixed on the door. She had sent for Lyra, and now she waited. The news of her daughter's pregnancy had shaken her to the core, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. A human child. It was unthinkable. The queen had always believed their people were too powerful, too special to mix with lesser beings like humans. But here she was, facing the reality that her daughter was carrying a human's child. Lyra entered the room slowly, her eyes cast downward, avoiding her mother's gaze. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm ready to break. Queen Vezara studied her daughter. Lyra was no longer the same strong princess she had once been. She seemed smaller, more fragile, as though the weight of her secret had finally caught up with her. "Lyra," the queen said, her voice cold, "sit down." Lyra hesitated before slowly lowering herself into the chair beside her mother. Her hands were clasped tightly together in her lap, her knuckles white from the pressure. The queen stared at her for a moment, her mind racing. She had been angry when she first heard the news, and she still felt that anger burning inside her. But now, sitting face to face with her daughter, she felt something else. Confusion. How had this happened? How had Lyra, who had always been so careful, ended up in a situation like this? "Tell me everything, Lyra," the queen demanded, her tone sharp. "How did this happen? Why did you fall in love with a human?" Lyra took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling. She had been preparing for this moment, but the words still felt hard to say. She looked up at her mother, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and love. "Mother, I didn't expect it. I didn't plan for any of this," Lyra began. "I went to Earth for the peace mission, like you told me. I met him there, Ethan. He's a soldier, a human, and he saved my life when I was in danger. He didn't see me as just an alien princess. He treated me like a person, like someone worthy of respect." The queen's eyes narrowed. "So this human saved your life, and that's why you fell for him?" Her voice was tight with disbelief. Lyra nodded, biting her lip. "At first, I didn't want to feel anything for him. I told myself it was just gratitude, nothing more. But the more I got to know him, the more I saw how different he was. He wasn't like the others I've met. He didn't care about my title or my status. He cared about me, about who I really am." The queen's expression softened for just a moment, but she quickly controlled it. "So you think this human is different? You think he is worthy of you, of our bloodline?" Lyra's voice shook as she spoke. "I know this isn't what you wanted, Mother. I know it's not what any of us planned. But Ethan, he's kind, and he loves me. I love him too. I don't know how or why, but I do. And now we are going to have a child." There was a long silence between them, broken only by the soft rustling of the palace curtains as a breeze flowed through the room. Queen Vezara's mind was spinning. She had always believed that her people's strength came from their unity, from their purity. She had always imagined her daughter marrying someone of their own kind, someone who could help lead their people to even greater power. But now, everything was different. The queen took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. "I don't understand, Lyra. This human, this soldier, what makes him so special? Why are you willing to risk everything for him? For a human child?" Lyra looked up, her eyes full of emotion. "Because he sees me, Mother. Not just as a princess, not just as an alien. He sees me for who I am. He listens to me, and he cares for me in ways no one else ever has. When we're together, I feel safe. I feel like I'm not alone in this world." The queen's heart clenched at her daughter's words. She had never seen Lyra so vulnerable, so open. It hurt her to see her daughter like this, torn between love and duty. The queen had always been the strong one, the one who had never let emotions cloud her judgment. But now she was struggling to understand. "I still don't know if I can accept this," Queen Vizara said softly, her voice heavy with doubt. "This child, this union between you and a human, it changes everything. It could change the future of our people, of our kingdom." Lyra's voice grew more desperate. "I know, Mother, but this isn't just about our people. It's about me. It's about my happiness. I never asked for this, but it happened. And now, all I ask is for your understanding." The queen stared at her daughter, her heart torn between her duty as a ruler and her love for her child. She wanted to protect Lyra, to keep her safe from the dangers of the universe. But she also knew that Lyra was no longer a child. She was a woman, capable of making her own choices. Queen Vizara closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "I don't know if I can accept this, Lyra, but I will not turn my back on you. I will meet this human. I will meet Ethan, and I will decide for myself if he is worthy of you." Lyra's eyes filled with hope. "Thank you, Mother. That's all I ask." As the queen looked at her daughter, she realized that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with questions and challenges. But for now, the queen knew one thing for sure. She would do whatever it took to protect her daughter, even if it meant facing a future she hadn't imagined. Meeting Ethan. The palace was quiet as the queen prepared to meet Ethan, the human who had stolen her daughter's heart. Queen Vizara sat on her throne, her posture rigid, her mind filled with a storm of emotions. She had agreed to meet this man, to see for herself what kind of person he was. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would change everything. Lyra stood beside her mother, her eyes full of hope and fear. She knew how important this meeting was. It wasn't just about her relationship with Ethan anymore. It was about the future of their people, their kingdom, and their way of life. If her mother didn't accept Ethan, everything she had hoped for would fall apart. But if Ethan could prove himself, if he could show the queen that he was worthy, maybe there was a chance for them all. "Mother, he's here," Lyra said softly, breaking the silence. Queen Vizara stood up from her throne, her eyes narrowing. She had to look strong, in control. She had to be the ruler her people needed, no matter what her heart was telling her. "Bring him in," she ordered, her voice cold but steady. Lyra nodded and left the room. A few moments later, Ethan stepped into the grand hall. He was tall and strong, with short, dark hair and a nervous look on his face. His clothes were simple but clean, a reminder that he was not of their world. His eyes were focused on Lyra, but he could feel the weight of the queen's gaze on him. He had heard stories of alien royalty, of their power and their pride. He knew that this was the moment that would determine everything. As Ethan entered, Queen Vizara studied him carefully. He looked different from anyone she had ever seen. His face was strong, but there was a softness in his eyes that made her pause. It wasn't the look of someone trying to prove something. It was the look of someone who truly cared. The queen hated how that made her feel. She had expected him to be rude, arrogant, or scared, but instead he looked calm. Almost too calm. "You must be Ethan," Queen Vizara said, her voice cool and commanding. "I am Queen Vizara. I assume you know why we are here today." Ethan nodded slowly, his throat tight. "Yes, Your Majesty. I know I am here because of Lyra and the child." The queen's gaze never left him. "You are a human. What do you know about our people? About our ways? Do you truly understand what it means to join with us?" Ethan took a deep breath, standing tall. "I may not know everything about your people, Your Majesty, but I know Lyra. I know she's special, and I know I love her. I would do anything to protect her and our child." The queen's eyes narrowed. She could see the sincerity in his voice, but proving himself. The days after the meeting with Queen Vezara were tense. Ethan knew the queen had not fully accepted him, and he could feel the weight of her judgment every time he crossed her path. But he was determined to prove himself. He loved Lyra, and he would do whatever it took to show the queen that he was worthy of her daughter. He had never imagined he would be in this situation, standing before an alien queen, trying to earn her approval. But his love for Lyra was stronger than any fear or doubt. And now, with the child growing inside her, he knew he had to prove himself, not just for Lyra, but for their baby too. Ethan spent every day working hard. He trained with the palace guards, learning the ways of the warriors who protected their people. He spent hours learning about their customs, their history, and their culture. But no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Queen Vezara wasn't easily impressed. She didn't trust easily, and that made everything harder. One afternoon, Queen Vezara called for him. Ethan's heart raced when he heard the summons. This was it. This was his chance to prove that he belonged. When he entered the queen's chambers, she was sitting on her throne, looking down at him with a cool, calculating gaze. Lyra stood off to the side, her eyes full of concern. She knew how much this meant to Ethan. "Ethan," the queen began, her voice steady, "I have been watching you. I see that you are trying, but that is not enough. I need to know that you are truly worthy of my daughter. Prove to me that you can handle the responsibilities that come with being a part of our world." Ethan swallowed, his palms sweating. He had expected this. He had known that simply showing up wouldn't be enough. But now, he wasn't sure how to prove himself. He had no idea what the queen wanted, but he knew he couldn't back down. "I will do whatever it takes," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves. "Tell me what you need me to do." Queen Vezara looked at him for a moment, her gaze sharp. "You will accompany me to the sacred forest," she said finally. "There is a challenge waiting for you there. If you succeed, I will begin to believe that you may be worthy. If you fail, you will never be allowed near my daughter again." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I understand. I won't fail." Lyra's eyes filled with worry, but she didn't speak. She trusted Ethan, but she also knew how dangerous the sacred forest could be. It was a place full of ancient creatures, traps, and challenges that no one could predict. But she had to believe in him. She had to trust that he could do this. The journey to the sacred forest was long and difficult. Ethan could feel the pressure mounting with every step. The queen and her guards led the way, but he could sense their doubt. They didn't believe in him, not yet. But he wouldn't give up. He couldn't. When they arrived at the entrance to the sacred forest, Queen Vezara turned to him. "This is where you will prove yourself," she said. "You will enter the forest and find the Heartstone. It is a rare crystal, and only those who are worthy can find it. If you return with it, I will begin to see you differently. If you fail, you will leave here without my approval." Ethan nodded, swallowing his fear. "I will find it." The forest was dark and thick, with towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. Strange sounds echoed through the air, and the ground was uneven, full of hidden dangers. Ethan moved carefully, his senses on high alert. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew one thing: he couldn't fail. Hours passed, and the deeper he went into the forest, the more difficult it became. The air grew heavier, and the sounds grew louder. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he navigated the thick brush, his eyes scanning for any sign of the Heartstone. Suddenly, he heard something behind him, a rustling in the leaves. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he had been given. A large creature stepped out from behind a tree, its eyes glowing in the dim light. It was a beast unlike anything he had ever seen, with scales like metal and claws sharp enough to tear through stone. Ethan froze for a moment, but then his training kicked in. He didn't have time to think. He had to act. He charged at the creature, using his training to avoid its attacks while striking back with everything he had. The battle was intense, but Ethan fought with all his strength and determination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the creature collapsed, its body falling to the ground with a heavy thud. Breathing heavily, Ethan stood over the defeated beast. He couldn't afford to waste time. He had to find the Heartstone. He pushed forward, ignoring the exhaustion in his body. The forest seemed to close in around him, but he kept going, step by step. And then, just as he was about to lose hope, he saw it, a faint glow in the distance. With renewed energy, he sprinted towards the light. There, in a clearing, was the Heartstone, its crystal glowing brightly. Ethan couldn't believe his eyes. He had found it. He picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The moment he touched it, a surge of energy ran through him, and he knew that this was the proof he needed. He had done it. He had proven himself. Ethan turned and began the long journey back to the Queen. His heart was racing, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The Queen's test had been hard, but he had passed. And now he was one step closer to proving that he was worthy of Lyra's love, and of the life they would build together. A new hope. The sun had begun to set over the vast alien landscape as Ethan returned to the palace, the Heartstone in his hand. His body ached, covered in dirt and sweat from the battle in the sacred forest, but his heart was full of hope. He had done what the Queen asked. He had faced the challenge, fought the creature, and brought back the Heartstone. Now, all he had to do was return to Queen Vezara and show her that he was truly worthy. The palace gates loomed in front of him, and his steps felt heavy with both anticipation and fear. He had faced down an alien creature, braved the dangers of the sacred forest, and found the Heartstone. But would it be enough to prove his worth to the Queen? Would it change the way she saw him? As Ethan entered the palace, he was met by Lyra, who rushed toward him with a look of concern. Her eyes scanned him quickly, noticing the dirt on his clothes and the exhaustion in his face. But she didn't say anything. Instead, she smiled softly, the warmth in her eyes telling him everything he needed to know. "You did it," Lyra whispered, her voice full of hope. "I knew you could." Ethan smiled at her, the weight of the day lifting slightly. "I had to. For you. For our baby." Lyra's smile grew, but she didn't say anything else. She simply took his hand and led him to the Queen's chambers. When they entered, Queen Vezara was sitting on her throne, her gaze cool and unreadable. She looked at Ethan as he approached, her sharp eyes studying him carefully. The Heartstone gleamed in his hand, and he held it out toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Your Majesty," Ethan said, his voice steady but full of hope. "I have completed the task you set before me. I fought and defeated the creature in the sacred forest, and I found the Heartstone." The Queen said nothing at first. She simply looked at the Heartstone in his hand, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. Ethan's palms were sweaty, his throat dry as he waited for her response. Finally, Queen Vezara spoke, her voice low but firm. "You did as I asked. You proved yourself, Ethan." Ethan's heart leaped in his chest. Does this mean you accept me?" The Queen remained silent for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as she considered his words. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I do not make such decisions lightly," Queen Vezara said. "But I see something in you, something I did not expect. You have faced the challenge, and you have shown me your determination. You have proven that you are capable of protecting Lyra and our child. For that, I will allow you to stay." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The relief he felt was overwhelming, and he had to swallow hard to keep from showing just how much it meant to him. "I won't disappoint you, Your Majesty," he said quietly. Queen Vezara's gaze softened just for a moment. "I hope not, human, for Lyra's sake, and for the future of our people." Lyra stepped forward, her smile growing brighter as she looked at Ethan. "Thank you, Mother," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for believing in him." The queen gave a small nod, but her expression remained serious. "Do not mistake my approval for weakness, Lyra. I will be watching both of you closely." Ethan felt the weight of her words, but he didn't flinch. He had earned the queen's approval, and he would do everything in his power to prove that he was worthy of it. As Lyra took his hand, Ethan felt a sense of hope he hadn't known before. Things were changing. They had to. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, he believed they might have a chance. Chance to build a life together. A chance to create a family, despite everything that stood in their way. The journey ahead would not be easy. Queen Vizara's approval was just the beginning. There were still many challenges ahead, many obstacles to overcome, but Ethan was no longer afraid. He had fought for Lyra, and he would fight for their future. No matter what came next, he was ready. Lyra squeezed his hand, and they shared a quiet moment together, their hearts beating in time with each other. The road ahead might be difficult, but for the first time, it didn't seem impossible. As they left the queen's chambers, Ethan's thoughts were filled with hope. The future was still uncertain, but now, for the first time, he felt like there was a path forward, a path that they could walk together, hand in hand. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, Ethan knew one thing for sure. He would never give up on Lyra. He would never give up on their family. The hope he felt now was something he could hold on to, something that would keep him going no matter how difficult the journey became. With the heartstone in his hand and the queen's approval in his heart, Ethan stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he was not alone. The kingdom's reaction. Ethan could feel the eyes of the kingdom on him. Queen Vizara had granted him her approval, but he knew that her acceptance was only the beginning. The kingdom had been watching, and now the people would decide if they truly accepted him. And there was no guarantee that they would. The moment he stepped out into the grand halls of the palace, the whispers began. Some people looked at him with curiosity, while others gave him cold, judgmental stares. Ethan tried to ignore them, but it was hard. He had never felt so out of place in his life. These weren't just any people. They were the people of Lyra's world. They were powerful, proud, and ancient, and Ethan was just a human. He couldn't change that. Lyra was by his side, as always, but even she couldn't hide the concern in her eyes. "It's going to be hard," she whispered to him, squeezing his hand. "Not everyone will be happy that you're here, but don't let them get to you." Ethan nodded, grateful for her support. "I won't," he said, though his voice wasn't as confident as he wanted it to be. The day after the queen's approval, an official ceremony was held to announce the news to the kingdom. It was a grand event, held in the central square of the palace. The people gathered in large numbers, their voices filled with excitement and suspicion. They wanted to know everything about the human who had managed to win the queen's favor. What was he like? Was he truly worthy of Lyra? Ethan stood at the front of the crowd with Lyra and the queen. As the queen raised her hand to silence the crowd, all eyes turned to them. Her presence was commanding, and her gaze was sharp, but there was something different in her eyes when she looked at Ethan. She didn't look at him as an outsider anymore. He had passed her test, and now he had her approval. "My people," Queen Vizara's voice rang out, strong and steady. "I bring you news. A decision has been made. Lyra, my daughter, will carry the child of this human, Ethan. He has proven himself worthy of our trust, and he will stand by her side as her mate. He is no longer a stranger, but a part of our kingdom." The crowd was silent for a moment, and then the murmurs began. Some people gasped in surprise, while others looked at each other with skepticism. Ethan felt the weight of their stares, but he stood tall. He had earned this moment. He would not let their doubts shake him. One voice rose above the others. A tall, broad-shouldered man in the crowd stepped forward, his face hard and serious. "How can we trust a human?" he called out, his voice echoing through the square. "He is not one of us. He doesn't belong here. He will never understand our ways." The man's words struck deep. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't back down. He had been ready for this. He stepped forward, his eyes meeting the man's. "I may not be one of you," Ethan said, his voice steady, "but I love Lyra, and I will do everything in my power to protect her and our child. I've learned your ways, and I will respect your customs. I may be human, but that doesn't mean I'm not worthy of her." The crowd fell silent once again. Some people looked at Ethan with renewed curiosity, while others still seemed uncertain, but the man who had spoken didn't back down. He crossed his arms over his chest and glared at Ethan. "Words are easy," the man said, "but actions speak louder. Let's see if you can really prove yourself." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I've already proven myself to Queen Vezara. I've fought in the sacred forest. I faced the challenges you put before me. If that's not enough for you, then I'll prove it again. I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I belong here." The man seemed to consider his words for a moment. Then, with a grunt, he turned and walked away, but his eyes stayed on Ethan, filled with doubt. The crowd remained silent, waiting for the queen's response. She stood tall, her eyes scanning the people. Finally, she spoke. "You heard him," Queen Vezara said, her voice firm. "Ethan has shown his strength, his loyalty, and his heart. He is not just a human. He is a part of our future, and you will respect him as you would any other member of our kingdom." The queen's words rang out like a command, and the crowd slowly began to quiet down. The man who had spoken earlier turned and disappeared into the crowd, and the whispers grew softer. Queen Vezara's authority was not to be challenged, and even those who disagreed with her had learned it by now. As the ceremony continued, Ethan felt a shift. The tension in the air seemed to lighten, even if only slightly. Some of the people looked at him with new eyes, some with curiosity, and some with a growing respect. He knew that earning their trust would take time, but this was the beginning. He had taken the first step. Later that evening, as they walked through the palace halls, Lyra turned to him with a smile. "You did well today," she said softly. "You stood your ground. They'll come around." Ethan smiled back, but there was still a weight in his chest. "I hope so," he said. "It's not going to be easy, but I'll keep proving myself. For you, for the baby, and for this kingdom." Lyra leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. "You've already proven more than enough. We'll face this together." And for the first time, Ethan believed it. The kingdom's reaction had been tough, but he had shown them that he wasn't going anywhere. He was part of their world now, and no matter how hard it got, he would stay by Lyra's side. Together, they would face whatever challenges came next. Acceptance. The days that followed the ceremony were filled with whispers, stares, and moments of doubt. Ethan knew the kingdom had not fully accepted him, but he had also made progress. Queen Vezara had given him her approval, and Lyra stood by him. But the most important thing was that he was not going to give up, no matter what the kingdom thought. He was determined to prove he belonged here. Each day, Ethan tried his best to show that he was worthy of Lyra and the child they were about to have. He spent hours learning the ways of the kingdom, its customs and traditions. He practiced the language, listened to the people, and showed them that he respected their way of life. Slowly, the people began to take notice. They saw him working hard, doing his best, and most importantly, they saw his love for Lyra. But there were still moments of tension. Some people didn't trust him, still whispered behind his back, and questioned his place in their world. One afternoon, while walking through the gardens, Ethan overheard two women speaking in hushed tones. "I can't believe the queen would accept a human into our family," one woman whispered. "He's not like us. He's not even close." Ethan felt a pang of disappointment in his chest, but he didn't stop walking. He knew he couldn't change their minds overnight, but he also knew he couldn't let their opinions stop him from doing what was right. Later that day, Queen Vezara called him to her chambers. Ethan entered the room, feeling both nervous and hopeful. The queen sat at her desk, looking as powerful as ever. She gestured for him to sit. "Ethan," the queen said, her tone serious but not unkind, "the kingdom is still divided on you. Some accept you, but others still question your place here. I know you've been working hard, but it is not enough to win their trust. You must prove yourself even further." Ethan looked at her, determined. "What can I do? I've given everything I have to show them that I belong. But it seems like they won't ever accept me." The queen paused for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. "It's not just about working hard. It's about sacrifice. You must prove you are willing to give up something important to you for the sake of our people. You must show them that you will do whatever it takes." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand. But what can I sacrifice?" The queen's gaze was sharp. "Your pride. Your human pride. There is a ritual, an ancient test, that must be completed by anyone who wishes to become part of this kingdom. It is called the trial of the heart. It is dangerous, and many have failed. But if you can pass it, you will prove your loyalty to us. You will prove that you are one of us." Ethan felt a rush of determination fill him. This was his chance to finally prove that he belonged here. "I'll do it," he said without hesitation. Queen Vizara nodded, a rare hint of approval in her eyes. "Very well. The trial will take place tomorrow. Prepare yourself." And the cave's entrance was dark and foreboding. He was nervous, but he also felt ready. This was the final step, the last test. Lyra stood beside him, holding his hand tightly. "You can do this," she said softly, her voice full of love and confidence. Ethan smiled at her, squeezing her hand in return. "For you, Lyra. For our family." He stepped forward into the cave, the darkness swallowing him whole. Inside, the walls were lined with strange glowing stones, casting an eerie light over the narrow path that led deeper into the cave. At the end of the path was a pool of still water, and standing in the center of the pool was a large stone pedestal. Ethan walked toward the pedestal, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As he approached, a voice rang out, booming and ancient. "Only those who are truly worthy may pass the trial of the heart. Prove your worth, human." Ethan took a deep breath. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew that he had to give everything he had. He stepped onto the pedestal, and suddenly, the air around him grew cold, and the world seemed to tilt. A vision appeared before him. His life as a human, his home, his family, his friends. It was a world he had left behind. Then the vision shifted, and he saw Lyra, standing alone in the kingdom, her face filled with sadness. The baby was in her arms, but she was all alone. The pain in Ethan's heart was overwhelming. He couldn't bear the thought of Lyra raising their child without him, of her facing the world alone. It was a test, and he knew what he had to do. He had to give up everything. His world, his past, his human pride. He had to prove that he would stay for her, for their child, and for the kingdom. "I choose this," Ethan said, his voice firm and steady. "I choose to stay. I choose to be with Lyra. I choose to protect her and our child, no matter the cost." The moment he spoke those words, the vision disappeared, and the cave grew still. The pedestal beneath him seemed to shake, and then a voice returned. "You have proven your heart, human. You have passed the trial." Ethan felt a rush of relief wash over him. He had done it. He had passed the final test. When he emerged from the cave, Lyra was waiting for him. Her face lit up when she saw him, and she ran to him, throwing her arms around him. "You did it," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Ethan smiled, feeling the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. "I did it. For us." And in that moment, as the kingdom watched, they knew. Ethan had proven that he was one of them. He had sacrificed his pride, his past, and his very heart for Lyra, for their future. And now, at last, he was truly accepted.